The maid who commits the perfect crime. The camera doesn't lie, but it only sees what I want it to see. Look at this man. Rich, powerful, and currently gasping for air in a silk-sheeted bed that costs more than my childhood home. To the coroner, this will look like a tragic late-night heart failure brought on by years of high-stress boardroom meetings. But you and I know the truth. It wasn't the stress that killed him. It was the 2 drops of clear, tasteless liquid I stirred into his midnight scotch while I was polishing the crystal. Welcome to Subtle Deception. I am Annabelle, and I am the help you never noticed. For 3 years I have moved through the shadows of the elite, folding laundry, scrubbing marble, and collecting the souls of men who thought they were untouchable. They call me a maid, the headlines call me a ghost, but tonight I am inviting you behind the curtain to witness the anatomy of the perfect crime. You're going to see exactly how I gain their trust, study their weaknesses, and dismantle their lives without leaving a single fingerprint behind. But be warned, once you see how easy it is to turn a sanctuary into a crime scene, you'll never look at your front door the same way again. We are just getting started on a 12-episode descent into a world where trust is the deadliest weapon you can own. If you have the stomach for the truth behind the accidents, hit the subscribe button now and join the collection. Stay quiet, stay sharp, and whatever you do, don't drink the tea. Let's begin with the man in the bedroom. He has 10 minutes left to live, and I have a house to clean. The sound of a body hitting Italian marble is heavier than you'd think. It's not a thud, it's a wet, bone-jarring crack that echoes through the hollow silence of a $20 million mansion. Julian Sterling lies at my feet, a man who built an empire on the broken backs of his rivals, now reduced to a frantic animal on the floor. His hand, adorned with a gold signet ring that could buy a small town, claws at the air, then at his chest, trying to tear through the fine silk of his shirt to reach a heart that has suddenly decided to quit. Beside him, the remains of his midnight scotch, a vintage Bordeaux cask finish, bleed across the white stone like a crime scene in the making. The glass is shattered into 1,000 diamond-like shards, reflecting the flickering firelight and the utter terror in his bulging eyes. He looks up at me. He's trying to scream, but his lungs are filling with the weight of his own betrayal. He sees a ghost. He sees the invisible help. He sees the woman who spent the last 6 months buffing these very floors, ironing his shirts with clinical precision, and fadding into the wallpaper of his opulent life. I don't move, I don't reach for the phone, I don't scream for the guards. I simply stand there, my hands clasped loosely in front of me, encased in the pristine white lace gloves that have become my modus operandi. I tilt my head, watching the way his pulse thrashes against his throat like a trapped bird. Slowly, I lift my left wrist and check my watch. The second hand ticks with a rhythmic, cold-blooded finality. "Don't fight it, Julian," I whisper. My voice is steady, a low, melodic rasp that cuts through his ragged gasps. The panic only makes the lethal toxin move faster. It's a delicate science, really. It takes exactly 4 minutes for the human heart to realize it's been betrayed by the very blood it pumps. This is the subtle deception of the domestic life. A home is supposed to be a sanctuary, a fortress of trust. But for a girl who grew up watching her mother wither under the shadow of a great man's cruelty in a kitchen just like this one, I know better. A house isn't a home, it's a hunting ground. And the most dangerous weapon isn't a gun or a blade, it's the woman you've trained yourself to ignore. Julian's fingers twitch one last time, reaching for the hem of my apron. He wants mercy. He wants the perfect maid to save him. He doesn't realize that I am the mastermind of his demise, the unsolved mystery that will haunt this estate long after the coroners haul his cold body away. To the world, this will be a tragic, high-stress cardiac arrest, another wealthy tycoon taken too soon. I lean down, my face inches from his, ensuring that my image is the last thing burned into his fadding retinas. "My mother died in a room that smelled like bleach and broken promises," I tell him, my voice devoid of empathy. "You're dying in a room that smells like expensive scotch and overdue justice. Consider the debt collected." The watch clicks, 4 minutes. Julian's eyes go static, the light goes out. The silence returns to the Sterling estate, heavy and suffocating. I stand up, smooth out the wrinkles in my apron, and begin to pick up the broken glass. After all, a good maid always cleans up the mess. 48 hours before Julian Sterling's heart forgot how to beat, I was just a girl in a sensible charcoal suit standing before a pair of iron gates. This is the invisible phase. Before the toxin, before the accident, there is the interview. To a homicide detective, a crime begins with a motive. To me, it begins with an invitation. The Sterling estate is a monument to excess, marble pillars, manicured lawns, and a silence so thick it feels predatory. I smoothed my skirt, adjusted my glasses, and lowered my chin. This is the mask, Annabelle, the soft-spoken domestic worker with impeccable references and a talent for disappearing into the woodwork. I wasn't here to apply for a job. I was here to conduct an audit of a man's life. Elena Sterling met me in the morning room. She was elegant, draped in silk that cost more than a year of my mother's wages, but her eyes were darting toward the hallway every time a door slammed in the distance. She was a woman living in a state of perpetual flinch. I've seen that look before. I grew up in its shadow. "We require total discretion, Annabelle," she said, her voice trembling slightly as she reached for a porcelain teacup. That's when I saw it. As her silk sleeve shifted, a dark, plum-colored bruise bloomed across her wrist, the unmistakable shape of a thumb and 4 fingers. A psychological thriller usually starts with a scream. Mine starts with a look. I didn't point it out. I didn't offer a platitude. I simply reached out, my fingers hovering inches from the silver tray, and caught the teacup before her shaking hands could drop it. I looked directly into her eyes, not with the subservience of a maid, but with the bone-deep recognition of a sister. It was a silent, sympathetic frequency. In that second, the air in the room changed. I wasn't a stranger anymore. I was a sanctuary. "I understand discretion, Mrs. Sterling," I whispered, my voice as smooth as the bleach I used to scrub away sins. "I know how to keep a house quiet. I know how to make sure the world only sees what you want them to see." The YouTube true crime community calls this manipulation. I call it a tactical entry. By acknowledging her pain without speaking it, I bypassed every security system in this mansion. I had her trust before the ink on my contract was dry. Trust is the most dangerous weapon because you hand it over willingly. As she led me through the grand corridors, explaining the delicate temperament of her husband, I wasn't listening to the chores. I was mapping the hunting ground. I noted the slippery grade of the grand staircase. I looked at the outdated wiring in the library. I catalogued Julian's medication in the cabinet, the very pills that would eventually provide the perfect cover for my modus operandi. This is the shadow phase of my work. I am the stain that looks like a shadow. I am the girl who learned in a grease-stained kitchen that men like Julian only feel powerful when they have someone to crush. My mother died beneath that weight because she had no one to balance the scales. I am here to make sure Julian's debt is paid in full. By the time I was shown to my small, sterile room in the servants' quarters, the assassin had already finished the work. The rest was just a matter of timing. I sat on the edge of the bed, pulled a single lace glove from my pocket, and smiled. The house felt cold, but I was comfortable. I've been living in the dark since I was 6 years old. Tonight, Julian Sterling thinks he hired a maid. He has no idea he just invited the end of his world to dinner. Cleaning is an act of erasure, but for me it is an act of preparation. While I buff the mahogany desks and steam the heavy velvet drapes of the Sterling estate, I am not just removing dust. I am taking a dark inventory. In every psychological thriller, the devil is in the details, and I am a master of the mundane. I spent the morning in Julian's study, moving with the rhythmic grace of a professional domestic worker. To the security cameras, I am a blur of grey fabric and rhythmic motion. But behind the glasses, my eyes are scanning the floor plan for dead zones. I note the height of the balcony railings and the exact chemical composition of the floor wax. In my world, a slippery surface isn't a hazard, it's a premeditated opportunity. But a perfect crime requires more than a method. It requires a scapegoat, a red herring to feed the hunger of the homicide detectives who will eventually swarm this room. Marcus is a man built of jagged edges and old resentments. He has a criminal record, aggravated assault from a decade ago, and a visible burning hatred for Julian Sterling. I've watched Marcus from the shadows of the attic windows. I've seen Julian belittle him, mocking his calloused hands and threatening to send him back to a cell over a patch of brown grass. Marcus is the perfect candidate for a police investigation. He is loud, he is angry, and he is exactly the kind of man the world expects to snap. As I organized the potting shed, I began the process of misdirection. I didn't steal Marcus's tools, I simply borrowed them. With my gloved hands, I took a small, specialized trowel from his kit and used it to pry at the window lock in Julian's study, just enough to leave a microscopic scratch that matches the tool's unique edge. I left a single, dark thread from Marcus's work jacket caught in the velvet of the study's curtains. It's a trail of breadcrumbs for a forensic sweep that hasn't happened yet. This is the shadow phase at its most clinical. In my mother's house there was never a scapegoat. There was only her, trapped in a kitchen that smelled of bleach and fear, with no one to blame but herself for the accidents my father caused. I watched the police walk through our home and see nothing but a clumsy woman. Now I make sure they see exactly what I want them to see. I am orchestrating a narrative where the obvious suspect is served on a silver platter, leaving me, the quiet, timid maid, to fade into the background. Marcus thinks he's just a man with a grudge. Julian thinks he's just a man with a servant. Neither realizes that I am the architect of their collision. By mid-afternoon, the inventory was complete. The house is mapped. The fall guy is positioned. The evidence is planted. Every time Marcus glares at the house from the garden, he is unknowingly signing a confession I've already written for him. I return to the kitchen to prepare Julian's evening scotch. The bottle is heavy, the crystal glass is clear, and the trap is set. Marcus is the shadow they will chase. I am the ghost they will never see. The moment before a kill is always the quietest. I stood in the master bedroom, the scent of expensive lavender polish masking the metallic tang of the toxin hidden in my apron pocket. I was seconds away from finalizing the perfect pour, ready to end Julian Sterling's reign of terror. But as I reached for the carafe on the nightstand, a microscopic glint of light caught the corner of my eye. It was nestled deep within the shadows of the air conditioning vent. My heart didn't race, it went cold. I am a professional invisible assassin, and I know the look of a lens. Using a specialized tool disguised as a duster, I unscrewed the vent cover with the silent efficiency of a domestic worker. Taped to the interior was a high-end, wireless pinhole camera. I pulled out my encrypted tablet, bypassing the home's local network to see where the feed was going. I expected a security firm. I expected the police. What I found was a psychological twist I hadn't prepared for. Julian Sterling wasn't just a victim to be. He was a voyeur. He had bugged every square inch of this sanctuary, the bedroom, the bathrooms, even the kitchen. He was recording Elena's every move, her every tear, her every whispered prayer for a way out. But it was the most recent file that stopped my breath. The footage showed Julian, sitting in this very chair an hour ago, hunched over a burner phone. His voice, usually a booming instrument of authority, was a hissed venom. "The insurance is set," he told the mystery caller. "Elena won't survive the weekend. Make the brake failure look like a tragic accident. I want her gone before the gala." The air in the room shifted. I felt a phantom pain in my ribs, an echo of the night my father's accidents finally broke my mother's spirit. For 20 years I've told myself I am a precision instrument of vengeance, a serial killer with a moral compass. But in this moment the midpoint reversal hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't just here to collect a husband. I was here to stop a predator from finishing what my father started. This is the unreliable narrator moment of my own life. I realized that my modus operandi wasn't just about the perfect crime. It was about the intervention. If I had waited one more day, Elena would be the headline, and Julian would be the grieving widower collecting a payout. The stakes have transcended a simple hit. I am no longer just a maid in the shadows. I am accidentally a vigilante in a house of mirrors. The homicide detectives who eventually walk this floor won't find a simple case of a domestic worker gone rogue. They will find a war zone where the hero and the villain wear the same face. Julian thinks he's the master of this house, watching everyone from his digital throne. He doesn't realize that I've seen his script, and I'm about to write a much darker ending. This isn't just about a paycheck anymore. It's about the girl who watched from the kitchen floor while her mother faded away. I replaced the vent cover, my movements clinical and calm. The toxin is still in my pocket, but the plan has evolved. The ticking clock has started. I have less than 3 hours to ensure Julian never makes that call again, and that Elena never has to flinch at the sound of a closing door. Subscribe and stay tuned where the execution begins. The husband collector is no longer just a name, it's a promise. Justice is being served, and I'm the one holding the tray. The intercom hissed with Julian's impatient bark, cutting through the silence of the kitchen like a serrated blade. "Annabelle, my flight to London was moved up. Car leaves in 3 hours. Get my study prepared and bring the Macallan. Now." The ticking clock didn't just start, it exploded. I had planned for a midnight execution, a slow, quiet fade into the dark. Now I had to perform the perfect crime in broad daylight, under the noses of a high-end security detail. I reached into the hidden lining of my apron, feeling the small, cold glass vial. This is the psychological depth of the hunt, the moment where the invisible assassin must remain a humble maid, even as her heart hammers against her ribs like a trapped bird. I moved to the crystal decanter, my hands steady despite the adrenaline surge. I began the perfect pour, measuring the amber liquid with clinical precision. Just as I uncapped the vial, the kitchen door swung open. Two of Julian's security guards, men built like brick walls with headsets and suspicious eyes, marched in. "Security sweep," the taller one grunted, his eyes scanning the stainless steel counters. "Boss is on edge. Nobody touches his intake until we verify." My breath hitched. This was the trial by fire. I turned toward the sink, shielding the decanter with my body, the vial still open in my palm. One slip, one drop on the counter, and the forensic evidence would scream my name. I felt the familiar weight of my mother's ghost in the room, the memory of her frozen in this same domestic setting, terrified of a man's sudden change in plans. But I am not her. I am the shadow that bites back. "Of course," I said, my voice a soft, timid murmur. "I was just polishing the glassware for the flight." The guard stepped closer, his shadow falling over the tray. He reached for the very glass I had just primed with the untraceable toxin. "Smells expensive," he muttered, leaning down, his nose inches from the rim. If he tasted it, he would be dead in minutes, and I would be in handcuffs before the car reached the gate. "Sir," I gasped, dropping a ceramic saucer onto the marble floor. The crash was deafening. Both guards jumped, their hands flying to their holsters. "Careful, girl," the guard snapped, his attention diverted to the shattered porcelain at my feet. "I am so sorry," I whimpered, looking down with wide, watery eyes, the ultimate camouflage of the weak. I'm so nervous about the Mr. Sterling's trip. Please, let me clean this up. I'll bring the tray up in a moment." They grumbled, disgusted by my perceived clumsiness, and exited the kitchen. I didn't exhale until the door swung shut. I looked at the tray. The glass was still there. The toxin was inside. This is the modus operandi of a ghost. I don't need a gun when I have the power to distract. I am using the very tools of my servitude, the apron, the chores, the broken dishes, to mask a cold-blooded homicide. The car is idling in the driveway. The clock is screaming. I picked up the tray, adjusted my posture, and began the long walk to the study. Julian Sterling is waiting for his drink. He has no idea that this is the last service he will ever receive. Don't breathe yet. Subscribe to witness the final seconds of Julian's life. The sweep is over, but the cleanup is about to get messy. The silence that follows a heart stopping is the loudest sound in the world. Julian Sterling is no longer a man. He is a structural error on the floor of his own study. I don't breathe until the final, rattled vibration leaves his throat. This is the forensic sweep, the invisible boundary between a serial killer and a ghost. To the world, I am just the help. To Julian, I am the last thing he will never understand. I move with clinical, terrifying precision. I don't use a mop or a bucket for this kind of cleaning. I use a microfiber cloth and a bottle of high-grade solvent. I wipe the crystal tumbler, removing every trace of the lethal toxin and my own presence. I replace the bottle of Macallan on the shelf, aligning the label to the exact millimeter it sat at 48 hours ago. My movements are an echo of my mother's, the way she would frantically straighten the house after a blow, trying to reset the world as if the violence had never happened. But while she cleaned to survive the past, I cleaned to secure the future. I knelt beside Julian. His eyes were wide, fixed on a ceiling he would never reach. I reached out and gently closed them, then adjusted his limbs. I draped his left arm across his chest and tilted his head toward the door. To any homicide detective, this will look like the textbook posture of a man who felt a sudden, crushing pain and collapsed while reaching for help. It is a masterpiece of forensic deception. Then the floorboard outside the door creaked. It wasn't the heavy boot of a security guard. It was a light, hesitant step. Adrenaline, cold and sharp as a needle, spiked through my veins. There was no time to reach the service stairs. I dropped to the floor and slid beneath the massive, silk-draped king bed in the connecting suite just as the door handle turned. From my vantage point on the carpet, I could only see feet. Elena's feet. She was wearing the soft velvet slippers I had laid out for her this morning. She walked slowly, her pace mirroring the dread that has defined her marriage. "Julian," she whispered. Her voice was thin, brittle. I held my breath until my lungs burned. I pressed my face against the floor, the smell of the lavender carpet freshener, the very one I had applied, filling my senses. This is the psychological depth of the domestic trap. I am inches away from the woman I am accidentally saving, hiding in the dust of the house I've just turned into a graveyard. A sharp, jagged gasp tore through the room. Then a thud as Elena dropped to her knees. I watched her slippers shuffle closer to Julian's still hands. The silence broke into a sob, not of grief, but of a sudden, overwhelming release of pressure. I stayed frozen. I am the invisible assassin, the shadow beneath the bed, witnessing the first moment of a widow's freedom. The police investigation will start soon. The sirens will scream and the questions will begin. I just need to wait for the first wave of chaos to break so I can slip back into the hallway, grab my duster, and become the shaken Maid once again. Subscribe and stay tuned. Detective Miller is at the door and he's looking for a ghost. Can I maintain the mask when the room is full of light? The hunt is far from over. The sirens arrived like a choir of judgment, their blue and red lights fracturing against the marble columns of the Sterling estate. Detective Miller was the first through the door. He wasn't the tired, coffee-stained investigator you see in movies. He was sharp, with eyes that moved like a predatory bird, scanning for the things that didn't belong. He didn't look at the body first, he looked at the room. He looked at the dust. He looked at me. Tragic, Miller muttered, his voice a low gravel as he paced the study. He stopped near the spot where I had wiped the floor. He was a healthy man, wasn't he, Annabelle? No history of heart trouble. I only know what I was told to clean, sir, I whispered, keeping my eyes fixed on my sensible shoes. I played the part of the trembling domestic worker to perfection, my hands clasped tightly in front of my apron. Inside, I was calculating his trajectory. Miller is dangerous because he understands the psychology of the home. He knows that secrets aren't kept in safes, they are kept in the corners of rooms that the owners ignore. While the forensic team began their sweep, Miller's attention turned to the staff. This was my window. I slipped away, moving through the servants' corridor with the practiced silence of a ghost. I didn't go to my room. I went to the basement, down past the industrial washers and the heavy scent of detergent, into the small, humid crawl space behind the furnace. I reached into a loose brick, a trick I learned in a much smaller, much louder house as a child, and pulled out a burner phone. The screen flickered to life, casting a cold, blue glow over my face. This is the moment the YouTube crime community has been waiting for. This isn't just about a maid with a grudge. This is about an architect of death. I bypassed 3 layers of encrypted security, the haptics buzzing against my fingertips. I logged into a dark web portal that doesn't exist on any standard map. The header read in stark crimson letters, the registry. This is the series glue. This is the hidden identity that turns a local homicide into a global conspiracy. My profile didn't say Annabelle. It didn't mention my mother or the grease-stained kitchen of my past. It simply displayed a string of alphanumeric data and a designation, Subject 7. I uploaded a single high-resolution photo of Julian Sterling's cooling body. Underneath I typed, asset liquidated, domestic cover intact, awaiting next deployment. A reply flashed instantly, payment processed, Registry 7 be advised, someone is tracking the collection, clean your trail. The weight of the organization settled over me. I am not a lone vigilante. I am a weapon in a much larger arsenal, a subject trained to use the domestic setting as a theater of war. My childhood trauma wasn't just an accident, it was an audition. I powered down the phone and tucked it back into the wall. Upstairs, Miller is searching for a killer. He's looking for Marcus the gardener, or perhaps a grieving wife with a motive. He is looking for a human. He has no idea that he is standing in the middle of a registry operation. I straightened my apron, smoothed my hair, and prepared to go back up to offer the detectives some coffee. After all, a good maid is always helpful. The final reversal is coming, and I'm about to find out that I'm not the only one watching the cameras. The collection is growing, but the shadows are closing in. The air outside the Sterling estate was crisp, smelling of damp earth, and the expensive cedar mulch Marcus had spread just hours ago. I walked down the long, winding driveway, my small suitcase in hand, the very picture of a dismissed domestic worker whose employer had met a tragic end. Behind me, the flashing lights of the police cruisers were fading into a dull, rhythmic pulse. The homicide investigation was in full swing, but I was already a memory. I reached the end of the gates and paused, pulling my phone from my pocket. A notification shimmered on the screen. A deposit of $500,000 had just cleared, the price for the soul of Julian Sterling. To the world, I am a ghost in a grey uniform, but to the registry, I am an elite asset. My bank account is a graveyard of men who thought their power made them invincible. I checked into a nondescript motel 5 miles away, the kind of place where people go to be forgotten. I sat on the edge of the stiff bed, the flickering neon sign outside casting a rhythmic red glow across the room. I opened my laptop, ready to file my final report and disappear into my next identity. But the screen didn't load my dashboard. Instead, it bypassed my security protocols and opened a live video feed. My blood turned to ice. The video was a high-angle shot of a room I recognized instantly, the master study, but it wasn't from the vent camera I had disabled. This was a different angle, a hidden perspective I had completely missed. The footage began to play, showing me Annabelle standing over Julian's body, the clinical precision of my modus operandi caught in crystal-clear high definition. I watched myself close his eyes. I watched myself wipe the glass. I wasn't the only one watching the house. I wasn't the only shadow in the room. A chat box flickered open at the bottom of the screen. A single message typed itself out, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. Beautifully done, subject 7, but you missed a spot. The camera on the screen began to zoom. It moved past Julian's cold hand, past the overturned chair, and focused on the dark corner beneath the mahogany desk. There, snagged on a jagged piece of the floor molding, was a single, white lace glove. My glove. A piece of forensic evidence so small it was invisible to the naked eye, but screaming like a siren under the lens of whoever was recording me. The hidden identity of my watcher remains a mystery, but the message is clear. The hunter is being hunted. The psychological thriller has just shifted gears, and the false victory of Julian's death is now a cage. I didn't just leave a glove behind, I left my signature at the scene of a perfect crime. I looked at the screen, my reflection staring back at me, a maid no longer in control of her own house. The ticking clock has reset. Somewhere out there, someone knows exactly who I am, and they are holding the keys to my survival. The collection isn't finished. Subscribe now and brace yourself for episode 2, The Traceable Mistake. The police are reopening the file and the glove is waiting to be found. Remember, the help is always watching, but who is watching the help?